The train hissed like a wounded animal as it slowed, steam rolling across the wooden platform in thick white breaths, and Eleanor, Whitmore stood among strangers with her single worn suitcase clutched in both hands, feeling as though the sound of that engine carried her entire past away with it. She had imagined this moment 100 times during the long journey west, the place where her new life would begin. The faces that would look at her not as a burden or a pity case, but as a woman chosen, wanted. Instead, the first thing she felt was silence, heavy and judging, broken only by the creak of boots on the planks and the low murmur of men who had come to see the mail-order brides, like livestock brought to market. She kept her chin lifted the way her mother had taught her, even though her chest ached with every breath. Eleanor was not young in the way the men preferred, not soft and giggling like the girls who stood beside her adjusting ribbons and smoothing skirts. She was 27, her beauty quiet rather than dazzling, her brown hair pinned neatly, her eyes steady but tired from a life that had taught her to endure. She had answered an advertisement not out of romance but survival, because in the East there was nothing left for a woman with no dowry, no family, and no one willing to claim her. Names were called. Men stepped forward. Smiles were exchanged, awkward hands shaken. One by one, the women were chosen, led away by hopeful suitors, already imagining futures built on youth and obedience. Eleanor waited. Her name came late, spoken without enthusiasm, and the man who stepped forward barely looked at her. He was older, red-faced, smelling of tobacco and impatience. He circled her once like a buyer inspecting a horse, then snorted. "She'll do," he muttered, then paused, his eyes narrowing as if reconsidering. "No, too thin, too old. I need a strong girl, someone who won't complain." He turned away before Eleanor could speak, leaving her standing there while the murmurs grew louder, sharper. Another man laughed. Someone whispered that she looked used up. The words struck harder than a slap. And for the first time since she'd boarded the train, Eleanor felt the sting of tears threaten. She swallowed them down. Crying had never saved her before. As the crowd thinned, the reality settled like dust in her lungs. Rejected again. The organizer, a nervous woman clutching a ledger, avoided Eleanor's eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, as if apology could soften humiliation. "Perhaps next month? Another town?" Eleanor nodded, though the thought of waiting, of being paraded again, hollowed her out. She stepped away from the platform, her suitcase suddenly feeling heavier than it ever had, and found herself at the edge of the town, where the buildings thinned and the land opened wide. The sky stretched endlessly, blue and unforgiving, and Eleanor wondered if this vastness would swallow her whole. She did not notice him at first. He stood, apart from the others, leaning against a post, hat pulled low, arms crossed over a chest broad from years of hard work. Caleb Walker had not come to choose a bride like the rest. He had come to pick up supplies, to pass through town the way he always did, quietly, without leaving a mark. A cowboy by trade and by nature, he was known for his skill with horses and his refusal to involve himself in matters that promised trouble. People said he was cold. Others said he was broken. The truth was simpler. Caleb had learned long ago that caring led to loss. So he watched from a distance as the scene unfolded, his sharp eyes catching details others missed, the way Eleanor stood straighter after each insult, the way her hands trembled only when she thought no one was looking. When the last couple left and Eleanor stood alone, something in Caleb shifted. He told himself it was none of his concern. He had no use for a wife. No space in his life for expectations or promises. His ranch was isolated, his days long and dangerous. A woman deserved better than that. Still, his boots carried him forward before his mind could stop them. Eleanor heard footsteps behind her and turned, prepared for another disappointment. Instead, she found herself looking into eyes the color of dark earth after rain, steady, assessing but not unkind. "You're not going with anyone," he said. Not as a question, but an observation. "No," Eleanor replied, her voice calm despite the storm inside her. "It seems I'm not what they were hoping for." Caleb studied her face, the faint lines of worry. the dignity she wore like armor. "What were you hoping for?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in a very long time. "A chance," she said after a moment. "To be useful. To belong somewhere." She almost laughed at herself for the honesty of it. Caleb nodded slowly. He understood that kind of hope, the dangerous kind, that could get a person killed if they weren't careful. "You got family back east?" he asked. "No." "Anyone waiting for you?" "No." The answers seemed to settle something in him. He glanced back toward town, then out toward the open land beyond, where the horizon promised hardship and freedom in equal measure. "You got somewhere to sleep tonight?" he asked. Eleanor hesitated. Pride warred with practicality. "I can manage," she said, though they both knew it wasn't true. Caleb sighed, a quiet sound of resignation more than frustration. "There's a boarding house on Main. I'll pay for a room. Just for the night." He held up a hand before she could refuse. No strings, no expectations. She studied him carefully. There was no hunger in his gaze, no calculation, just a man offering help because he could. "Thank you," she said softly. They walked together in silence, two strangers bound briefly by circumstance. Inside the boarding house, Caleb paid without comment, then turned to leave. Eleanor watched him go, a strange ache forming in her chest. Not longing, but curiosity. She had been seen today, truly seen, and it frightened her more than rejection ever had. That night Eleanor lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the unfamiliar town. She told herself she would leave in the morning, find work, find a way forward as she always had. Yet her thoughts kept returning to the cowboy with the quiet eyes, to the way he had looked at her not as a burden, but as a person. She did not know that Caleb, riding back to his ranch under a sky crowded with stars, was wrestling with thoughts of his own. He told himself he had done enough. That was the end of it. But the image of Eleanor, standing alone on that platform, followed him across the miles. And for the first time in years, the silence of his life felt heavier than the dangers he faced each day. Far from town, as coyotes howled and the wind whispered through dry grass, two lives that had been shaped by loss and endurance drifted unknowingly toward the same crossroads. Neither of them could yet imagine how deeply that single moment of rejection would change everything, or how the quiet cowboy who had offered only a bed for the night would one day speak words that would redefine them both. Morning came to Eleanor Whitmore quietly, the pale light slipping through thin curtains as if unsure it was welcome. And for a long moment she lay still in the narrow boarding house bed, listening to the distant sounds of wagons and voices, reminding herself where she was and what she was not. She was not chosen. She was not claimed. She was still alone. Yet when she sat up and placed her feet on the cold floor, there was a strange steadiness inside her that had not been there the day before, a fragile sense that something had shifted even if she could not yet name it. She dressed carefully, smoothing her skirt, pinning her hair with the same care she had used back east when appearances were all she could control, and by the time she stepped outside, she had already decided she would not wait to be rejected again. She would find work, any work, and build something for herself, even if it took every ounce of strength she had left. She had nearly reached the edge of town when the sound of hooves approached behind her, slow and deliberate, and she turned to see Caleb Walker riding toward her, his horse moving with the calm confidence of an animal that trusted its rider completely. He reined in a few feet away, studying her with that same thoughtful expression, as if he were measuring not her worth, but the weight of a decision he had carried all night. "You're leaving," he said. "Yes," Eleanor replied honestly. "I don't intend to wait around for another humiliation." Caleb nodded. "Figured as much." He shifted in the saddle, then spoke words that surprised them both. "I could use help on my ranch." Eleanor blinked. "Help?" She repeated, cautious now. "You mean as a hand?" "House, mostly," he said. "Cooking, mending, keeping the place from falling apart. It's not easy work, and it's isolated." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I won't lie to you." She considered him, the open road stretching behind her, uncertainty in every direction. "And what would you want in return?" she asked quietly. "Fair pay," Caleb answered. A roof, food, respect. He met her eyes squarely. Nothing else? Eleanor searched his face for deception and found none. What she saw instead was a man offering her a choice rather than a rescue, and that mattered more than she could explain. "All right," she said at last.
I'll try.
The ride to Caleb's ranch took hours, the land unfolding vast and untamed, and Eleanor felt both small and strangely free as the town disappeared behind them. The ranch itself was modest, a sturdy house weathered by time, a barn, open fields bordered by low fencing, but it stood solid against the elements, much like the man who owned it. Caleb showed her the spare room without ceremony, explained the routines of the place, then left her alone to settle in. It was the first time in years Eleanor had entered a space without feeling she was intruding, and the thought settled deep in her chest. Days turned into weeks, and a rhythm formed. Eleanor worked hard, harder than she ever had, but the work carried dignity instead of desperation. Caleb treated her with quiet courtesy, never overstepping, never prying into her past. In the evenings, they sometimes shared meals in companionable silence, and when they did speak, it was about practical things, the weather, the animals, repairs that needed doing. Yet beneath the calm surface, something grew. Eleanor noticed the way Caleb watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, not with hunger, but with consideration, as if he were learning the shape of her presence in his life. Caleb, for his part, found himself listening for her footsteps, for her voice humming softly while she worked, and the realization unsettled him more than any storm ever had. The turning point came one night when a sudden illness swept through the ranch hands, families nearby, and Eleanor worked tirelessly to help where she could, tending children and cooking for those too exhausted to stand. Caleb watched her move through crisis with calm strength, offering comfort without complaint, and something in him finally broke open. Later, as they stood outside under a sky heavy with stars, the silence between them stretched, charged with unspoken truths. "You'd be good at it," Caleb said suddenly. "At what?" Eleanor asked. "Building a life," he replied. His voice was low, almost rough. "A real one." She turned to him then, her heart pounding. "Is that what you want, Caleb?" He hesitated, the past pressing in on him, the losses, the fear of hoping again. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I don't know how to say this right," he admitted. "I don't have much to offer. But what I have is yours if you want it," he swallowed, and then spoke the words that changed everything. "Be the mother of my children." The world seemed to still. Eleanor searched his face for doubt, for pity, for anything that would cheapen the moment, and found only resolve and vulnerability laid bare. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being wanted, not despite her strength, but because of it. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." In that quiet place, under an endless sky, two lives that had known rejection and loneliness found purpose in each other, and the future stretched before them not as a promise of ease, but of meaning. Their story did not end there. It was only beginning, and if you want to, witness how love grows from endurance, how broken paths lead to unexpected joy, and how courage reshapes destiny. Like this story, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful tales like this.